Apache warriors once sprinted 70 miles across the desert without a single drop of water. U.S. scouts collapsed where these barefoot fighters thrived. What did they chew that kept them alive? And how did they disappear without leaving a single footprint? This isn't myth. Army reports from 1883 documented it. Let's dig into the secrets. Chapter 1. How did the Apache drink no water for 2 days and still run? Imagine sprinting through the desert for 70 miles. No canteen, no water stop, just sun, dust, and heat. Now imagine doing it without collapsing. That was the reality for the Apache runners. Some of the most resilient endurance warriors the American continent has ever seen. According to U.S. military scout reports from the 1880s, Chiricahua Apache runners were documented covering 50 to 70 miles in a single day. In one jaw-dropping case, a scout in Arizona followed an Apache messenger who had run from Fort Bowie to the Sierra Madres, a 130-mile trek completed in under 2 days, with only 2 brief stops and no visible water sources. So how did they do it? The Apache had mastered desert hydration without rivers. They chewed the pith of the mescal plant, particularly the agave's fibrous heart, known to release slow-drip moisture and sugars. They also pre-chewed sotol and yucca roots, rich in stored liquid, and cached them along common migration trails. On longer raids, runners carried leather water bladders lined with beeswax to prevent evaporation, but often they relied solely on internal discipline. Apache children were conditioned from a young age to withstand heat, thirst, and muscle pain, running barefoot over gravel until calluses formed like sandals. Army General George Crook once remarked, "I've seen no cavalry unit, not even our best, that could match an Apache on foot." But it wasn't just about stamina. It was survival by necessity. The terrain of the Southwest, especially the Chiricahua Mountains, Sierra Blanca, and Big Bend region, meant water sources were sparse. A man who couldn't adapt didn't make it. One Apache elder told an anthropologist in 1934, "Water is not in your mouth, it's in your mind." Now that you've seen how they conquered thirst, wait till you see what they did with poison cactus in the next chapter. You won't believe how they turned pain into protection and even made it lethal. Chapter 2. What did the Apache do with poison cactus? To most, cactus is an obstacle. To the Apache, it was armor, weapon, medicine, and sometimes a trap. Soldiers who chased Apache warriors through Arizona's Sonoran terrain often ended up bleeding, hallucinating, or worse. And it wasn't the warriors' arrows that got them. Apache survival mastery extended even to the most feared flora of the Southwest, the cholla cactus, also called the jumping cactus, due to its barbed spines that latch onto anything that brushes past. The Apache didn't just avoid it, they harvested it. They used cholla sap, rich in polyphenols and antiseptic compounds, as an emergency sterilizer. According to a 1940 ethnobotanical survey by Edward Castetter, cholla was crushed, boiled, and used to clean wounds, especially arrow or knife injuries, long before iodine existed. But they took it further. Apache warriors often coated their arrowheads with fermented cactus juice and snake venom, creating a mild paralytic toxin. Some used dried cactus splinters dipped in Gila monster saliva, which has psychoactive properties now studied in modern neuropharmacology. In ambushes, they created thorn traps, a circular patch of prickly pear or cholla buried under leaves and baited with footprints or decoys. One harrowing account from 1851 tells of a group of Mexican raiders chasing a band of Mescalero Apache into a canyon north of present-day Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. At dawn, the men woke screaming. Dozens of them had stepped into a ring of cholla spines deliberately planted in their camp perimeter. 2 men later died of septic infections. The Apache vanished without a trace. Apache midwives even used cactus to slow bleeding during childbirth, and its internal pulp helped reduce fevers. The spines themselves were sometimes heated and inserted under the skin to draw out poison, or, in rare cases, mark warriors after rituals. Western doctors at the time dismissed it as primitive witchcraft, but modern science backs much of it up. A 2020 clinical study found cactus mucilage can reduce infection rates by 28% when applied to wounds in arid conditions. The next time you see cactus as just a plant, remember, For the Apache, it was survival in every form: blade, balm, and boundary. But what if I told you Apache children used something even stranger to protect villages? That's exactly where we're heading next. With corn dolls that weren't toys, they were traps. Chapter 3. How did Apache women trick raiders with corn dolls? They looked like harmless little toys hanging from trees. But by the time raiders realized they were being watched, it was too late. Because Apache corn dolls weren't just playthings. They were early warning systems, spiritual decoys, and sometimes bait. Crafted from dried corn husks, yucca cord, and rabbit fur, these handmade figures, known as tsaigo among the Chiricahua, were originally used to honor the spirits of harvest and fertility. But over time, especially during the height of Mexican raids in the early 1800s, Apache women weaponized them. One technique was startlingly clever. Dolls were hung from low branches near false trails or empty camps, designed to fool enemies into thinking families had just fled. The wind made the dolls sway. Some were even fitted with bone whistles or small deer bladder pouches that released subtle whines. Raiders, thinking they'd caught their quarry off guard, would enter right into a trap or decoy zone. In 1851, the Diario del Ejército Mexicano recorded a skirmish in Sonora where an entire 14-man unit was lured into a phantom village, filled with shaking dolls and no fire. Minutes later, arrows fell from the cliffs. Only 3 escaped alive. Some Apache elders claimed that certain dolls weren't meant for enemies, but for spirits. In Indi's traditional belief, dolls could serve as soul placeholders, meaning if a child or elder had to flee during a raid, a doll was left behind to trick evil spirits or sorcerers into thinking the soul still remained. The psychological warfare aspect ran deep. By the 1870s, U.S. cavalry troops reported finding dolls rigged to spring noisy booby traps made of yucca pods or trip over stacked stones. Basic, but effective. In the Mescalero Apache Reservation archives, one elder recounted a story where a raiding party approached a camp at night. They saw shadows moving, figures sitting still by the fire. Only when they drew closer did they realize they were watching a ring of corn dolls around a fire pit, with ashes still warm, but no people for miles. Even Apache children helped plant them, making survival a communal ritual. Coming up next, the most mind-blowing fire technique you've never seen: how the Apache cooked food at night with no smoke, no flame, and no light. Let's go underground, literally. Chapter 4. Why did the Apache bury their fires underground? They cooked full meals at night, feet from enemy patrols. No smoke, no flame. Not even the smell gave them away. How? The Apache mastered the art of the underground fire, a trick so effective it baffled U.S. scouts for decades. Known among the Western Apache as kiodi, these smokeless earth ovens weren't just practical, they were tactical. Dug deep into the arid soil, the pit fire used a vertical vent for airflow and a side chimney to diffuse heat and smoke. It was essentially a reverse grill, covered with flat rocks, layered with earth and grasses to absorb scent and embers. The real genius? The draft system. Using Bernoulli's principle, without ever knowing the physics, the Apache created a slow-cooking, scent-hiding convection system. Tests done by archaeologist Dr. David Brugge in 1967 at Fort Apache revealed these pits could cook 2 to 3 pounds of meat with zero smoke visibility from even 50 feet away. Military documents from 1877, particularly scout journals during the Apache campaigns in Arizona, described camps that had warm ground but no fires. One lieutenant remarked, "We smelled food, but not a soul or smoke to be seen. Either ghosts were eating or devils cooking underground." These pits weren't limited to cooking. Warriors used similar techniques to burn hides for glue, boil plants into dye, and even brew mezcal liquor during ceremonies, all while invisible to enemies. A typical setup took just 20 minutes. Kids and elders helped dig, line the pit with rock, and use soaked mesquite bark for long-burning heat. The pits were often disguised with scattered ashes and hoof prints to resemble a disturbed animal trail. Anthropological fieldwork in White Mountain Apache territory found over 200 such pits in a single 2-acre area. Proving this wasn't rare, but a systemized method of survival. Some of these pits still exist. In fact, a 2002 drone survey over the San Carlos Reservation discovered heat signatures from centuries-old cooking pits, still detectable in winter due to the clay's heat retention. Now think about that. Technology so advanced in its simplicity that it still works centuries later. But wait until you see what the Apache did with rock shadows and dust to completely vanish from sight during a chase. That trick's coming up next, and it's even more unbelievable. Chapter 5. How did Apache warriors vanish into dust and shadows? Imagine chasing someone through the desert. Then suddenly they're gone. No tracks, no sound, just rocks and silence. That's what happened again and again to US soldiers trying to follow Apache warriors. Apache stealth wasn't just about speed. It was a science of terrain, timing, and total sensory manipulation. Warriors memorized every ridge, dry wash, and canyon curve in their homelands. But more importantly, they used dust and shadows as weapons. Let's start with dust. During pursuit, Apache warriors sometimes kicked up loose soil, deliberately using yucca-tied bundles strapped to their ankles, creating false trails that split in opposite directions. Soldiers often followed the wrong plume while the Apache circled back through the rocks. The Apache also knew the desert's light cycles like clockwork. At dawn and dusk, the long shadows of boulders and cliffs stretched miles across the sand. Warriors used these to blend in while motionless, covering their skin in ash and ground charcoal to match the stone. Some wore deerskin cloaks lined with crushed mica, which caught light and confused depth perception. In the Battle of Apache Pass, 1862, Union troops reported firing at moving rocks. What they didn't know, Apache scouts were using loose rock piles as mobile blinds, crawling a few inches at a time. One Mescalero Apache scout named Chutu was recorded crawling over 300 yards in under 2 hours, undetected, across a battlefield, wearing only a loincloth smeared in red clay. Even today, special forces study these tactics. In 2019, the U.S. Army's Survival School at Fort Huachuca reintroduced Apache shadow blending into its desert evasion drills. And coming up next, a sound-based trick so terrifying it made armed soldiers drop their rifles and run. Let's talk about the war scream you weren't meant to survive. Chapter 6. What was the terrifying secret behind the Apache war cry? Some soldiers claimed it came from the sky. Others swore it echoed from inside their heads, but all of them ran. The Apache war cry wasn't just noise, it was a psychological weapon, perfected over generations. Known among the Western Apache as Biwichi Igi, roughly the Red Echo, this piercing, high-pitched shriek was unlike any battlefield sound known to U.S. forces. It wasn't shouted once, it came in rapid bursts, layered by multiple warriors, each modifying their pitch to create a disorienting banshee effect. In 1871, during the Battle of Camp Grant, several survivors described hearing screams that split the mountain in half. One soldier reportedly shot into the sky, convinced he was surrounded. According to Army Surgeon Dr. Elias Freeman, the sound spiked men's heart rates and triggered auditory hallucinations. Some fell to their knees shaking. Apache youth were trained to master this cry from childhood. Boys would run through canyons and shriek until their voices cracked, learning to control volume, pitch, and echo placement. In fact, in certain canyon systems, like the Gila River Basin, the cry would bounce 3 to 4 times, giving the illusion of a much larger war party. At its peak, a coordinated Apache ambush could involve 6 to 10 warriors screaming in unison, simulating the presence of dozens. In 1880, a company in New Mexico fled a ridge, leaving supplies behind after encountering just 4 Apaches who used the terrain and the war cry in tandem. Even in modern labs, simulations have clocked authentic war cries at 102 to 106 decibels, comparable to a siren at 10 feet. And while sound can terrify, the next trick didn't even make a noise. It slithered. Chapter 7. Why did Apache warriors keep rattlesnakes in their camps? Some slept beside them, others carried them in bark cages, and when raiders approached, they let them loose. Apache warriors didn't just fear rattlesnakes, They revered and weaponized them. Among the Mescalero and Chiricahua Apache, the rattlesnake, Tweezy, was believed to carry spiritual significance and power. But beyond symbolism, it served a very real purpose in defense and survival. Historical accounts, like the 1892 field notes of ethnologist James Mooney, record Apache scouts using live rattlesnakes as perimeter guardians. They placed them inside brush corrals, under sleeping mats, or at choke points near trails, ensuring that anyone approaching would trigger the snake's rattle or worse, its bite. One 1864 incident near the Rio Grande stunned Union troops. While pursuing a small Apache raiding band, several soldiers stumbled into a clearing surrounded by snakes tied at the tail with yucca cord, their rattles hidden beneath leaves. 3 men were bitten. The Apache vanished during the chaos. It wasn't just about fear. Rattlesnake venom was harvested in small quantities and mixed with plant-based paralytics to coat arrow tips. Apache shamans were said to develop immunity through microdosing venom, though this remains debated. However, early 20th century oral histories from the Fort Apache Reservation mention specific rites where boys were made to handle rattlesnakes as a test of calmness and control. There's even evidence of Apache warriors wearing rattlesnake skins on their legs for stealth during night raids, both as camouflage and as a symbol of silent, sudden power. By using the land's deadliest creatures as both camouflage and defense, the Apache turned fear into protection. And if you thought snakes were wild, wait until you see what they did with fire ants and chili powder in their most brutal trap. Coming next, the Apache ant pit punishment. It wasn't for enemies, it was for traitors. Chapter 8. What was the Apache ant pit punishment? Buried to the neck, eyes sealed with pitch, and fire ants poured over the face. No soldier saw it, only traitors did. Among the harshest survival cultures in North America, the Apache had one unwritten law. Betrayal meant unimaginable consequences. The ant pit punishment wasn't a battlefield tactic. It was an internal code enforcement tool. According to oral accounts from the San Carlos Apache Reservation, those who betrayed tribal movements to outsiders or brought danger to the group faced something worse than exile. They were marched to the nests of red fire ants, Solenopsis xyloni, a native species with one of the most painful bites in North America. The condemned were buried upright, sometimes with arms bound, and left immobile from the shoulders down. Apache elders smeared a resin made from pine pitch or ocotillo sap across the eyes and ears, not to protect the victim, but to keep them from hearing or seeing their executioners, believed to confuse spirits and deny closure. In extreme cases, crushed chili pods were rubbed into wounds or mouths of the accused before ant exposure. This wasn't just torture, it was ritual purification through pain. One 1938 interview by ethnographer Grenville Goodwin tells of a young Apache man in the late 1800s who betrayed his tribe to Mexican soldiers. He was caught, judged by tribal leaders, and placed in an ant nest just after sunrise. By noon, he was unconscious. By evening, gone. His name was never spoken again. Modern entomologists estimate that sustained fire ant attacks can result in over 3,000 bites an hour, each releasing alkaloid venom that causes intense burning and, in some cases, anaphylactic shock. These punishments weren't common, but their existence kept the tribe loyal under extreme pressure from both colonizers and other tribes. In Apache law, the greatest enemy was the one who turned from within. And now we turn to the most spiritual trick of them all, how Apache dreams foretold danger and changed entire village paths. That's next. Chapter 9. Did Apache dreams really predict danger? A child wakes up screaming. The next morning, the hunters change course. 2 days later, a patrol walks straight into the old trail and never comes back. To the Apache, dreams weren't symbolic, they were maps. Among the Chiricahua, Mescalero, and Jicarilla Apache, dream interpretation, known as Nigozan, wasn't confined to shamans. Entire villages relied on the visions of children, elders, and scouts to detect invisible threats, predict raids, or even find water in dry seasons. Ethnographic records by Morris Opler, 1941, reveal how Apache groups treated dreams as literal guidance, not metaphors. One example from the White Mountain Apache in 1879 tells of a 12-year-old girl who dreamt of white animals moving like fire through the trees. Her clan delayed their travel by 2 days. U.S. cavalry scouts later confirmed a mounted patrol had moved through the area on the original travel day. Dreams involving owls, associated with death, or coyote tricksters were treated with special caution. If more than one person dreamt of the same sign in a 3-day period, plans were abandoned entirely. The probability of this wasn't rare. Within small bands of 20-50 people, overlapping dreams often occurred. Apache medicine men also used vision quests to receive long-term warnings. By fasting for 3 to 4 days and inhaling sage smoke or datura infusions, they entered altered states where symbolic messages guided migrations, marriage choices, and battles. In 1884, a Mescalero chief named Naizi dreamt of rising snakes on the southern horizon. Days later, a raiding party was attacked by Mexican soldiers coming from the south, an ambush they'd never expected. Even into the 20th century, dream warnings held weight. During WFTT, Apache code talkers sent home letters describing bad spirit dreams before their units suffered casualties, a phenomenon documented in U.S. Army psychological operations files. To the Apache, waking life was unpredictable. But the dream world, that's where the real truths lived. If those tactics blew your mind, just wait until you see how the Comanche hacked the cavalry playbook. Hit that subscribe, share this with a fellow history nerd, and remember, what looks like myth is often just forgotten science.